It is obvious that Lawrence's lifelong illness, tuberculosis, had a massive impact upon his life and literary works, but how much did it affect him? Lawrence probably would have travelled around during his life due to his restless nature, but the urgency to constantly move on mainly existed from his need for cleaner air. Because of his illness, the areas he did travel to had to remain unpolluted and towards the southern regions of multiple countries. The southern areas would have been beneficial to his breathing and could be a factor as to how he lived with the disease for so long. Had he stayed in smoggy England for the rest of his time, he would have lived a much shorter life, especially with the highly polluted air that came with coal dependency within large cities such as Nottingham. Travelling to various regions is how several pieces of his work came to be, such as Sea in Sardinia, Kangaroo, and Mornings in Mexico. This shows that his need for clean air also led him to sources of great literary inspiration. Lawrence was largely in denial about his tuberculosis and doesn't mention it throughout any of his published works. He disliked any talk around his health at all, including shouting at anyone who dared to mention his illness to him. As mentioned in The Savage Pilgrimage, Lawrence distrusted the verdicts of doctors as much as the scientific descriptions of illness. There isn't a story based around the idea of someone running from a disease and ultimately dying. This doesn't mean that the idea of someone running from their past isn't explored within his works. Sons and Lovers explores the idea of someone running from their predetermined fate as an example. The disease had a large effect on his early life, having taken his eldest brother from the family. However, this could have been a silver lining for Lawrence, as it meant his mother's attention and desire to raise a successful child would shift from Ernest to himself after the tragedy. Without his mother's focus, it could be said that Lawrence wouldn't have had the education from his mother and the opportunity to study at Nottingham College. Tuberculosis finally killed Lawrence at 44. Without the disease ending his life early, he could have gone on to write many more novels or pursue his interest in painting, amongst many things. Alternatively, perhaps it was the fear of death that hovered over his mind that led his work to achieving such phenomenal output in his short years. This impending clock running in the background of his life led him to live so energetically. Maybe the reason he could never sit still was because he realised it was a luxury he couldn't afford, much like the other 4 million in England alone that died from TB in the same decade he caught it. This is the key factor in how tuberculosis may have affected his literary work. It made him ever willing to push boundaries and sacrifice for his visions of each novel, realising that the novels and ideas within them are going to survive long past himself. During Lawrence's final days, he became homesick for Eastwood, the town in which he grew up. It's likely that he became nostalgic of the idea of being at home once again after all his travels. The likelihood that the Eastwood community would have accepted him back after all the bridges he'd burned back home would mean that it would always remain a nostalgic idea with no real chance of happening.